Avengers! Assemble.
Avengers Endgame has now been in theaters for well over a month, and it's safe to say it's had a massive, mostly positive impact on audiences around the world.
Alright, hey! Alright, good job, guys.
But it will have disappointed some people, namely those whose pre-release theories were debunked by the movie.
God, it's so awful.
For example, anyone who theorized that Captain Marvel would use her powers to travel into the quantum realm wouldn't have been too pleased. And there were also plenty of theories that were neither debunked or confirmed. Theories that could still turn out to be true. And that's what this video is all about. One of the most hopeful theories about Avengers Endgame prior to its release was that it would introduce the X-Men to the MCU. Disney, who owned Marvel Studios, acquired Fox in the build-up to the movie, and given that Fox has been making X-Men movies since the year 2000...
What do they call you? Wheels?
It was theorized that there might be at least a hint towards mutants in the fourth Avengers movie, possibly in a mid- or post-credits scene. That wasn't to be, but there's still every chance that the events of Endgame have opened the door for the X-Men to appear in the MCU.
I still have hope.
You see, a lot of power was thrown around in the movie. There were no less than 2 snaps using all 6 Infinity Stones. And as the trailers from Spider-Man Far From Home have confirmed, that tore a hole in reality that resulted in beings from other universes crossing over.
I'm sorry, you're saying there's a multiverse?
That could very well be the way in which the X-Men enter the MCU. Of course, the power that was thrown around could also result in people with the X gene developing powers all over the world in the franchise, which is another way in which the X-Men could be introduced to Marvel's flagship movie franchise. Given that Thanos being defeated was pretty much inevitable in Avengers Endgame, a lot of fans theorized that the movie would introduce, or at least hint towards, the new big bad of the MCU. That didn't end up happening, but the door was certainly left open for at least one potential new villain to make his presence felt going forward in the franchise. That villain is Norman Osborn.
Think about it, hero!
And there was one thing in particular about Endgame that we believe might have been a clue about his future introduction. It was revealed in the movie that the surviving Asgardian refugees had started a new town in Norway, which they had rather unimaginatively named New Asgard. Now, in the comics, when Asgard was located on Earth, floating above Oklahoma in that case, it was a major part of the Siege storyline in 2010. That arc saw an invasion of New Asgard by Norman Osborn, who was being manipulated by Loki. Most movie fans know Osborn as Spider-Man's enemy, the Green Goblin, but he is so much more than that in the source material.
You know how much I sacrificed?
Should a Siege movie be forthcoming in the MCU, it is definitely something to get excited about, and it would surely include Osborn. With that in mind, the theory that Endgame would help to introduce him remains very much intact. Another theory that some MCU fans conceived prior to Avengers Endgame is that Loki would be revealed to be alive. Tom Hiddleston's God of Mischief was of course killed by Thanos at the start of last year's Avengers Infinity War when the Mad Titan snapped his neck on board the Asgardian refugee vessel.
No resurrections this time.
While we saw the 2012 version of Loki escape custody in New York, that would have created a new timeline in which a different Loki was alive. Meaning the Loki we know so well was still dead. Or is he? In spite of the fact that the main timeline Loki wasn't revealed to be alive, the theory that he is indeed still amongst the living could still be true.
Well, I guess that's worth a look.
You see, Loki wouldn't want to be chased, so there's a sub-theory suggesting he left a convincing illusionary copy of himself behind, which the Avengers kept in captivity, and who doubled for the God of Mischief going forward in the MCU. That would keep the timeline in check, meaning the Loki who died in Infinity War was a copy, and the real Loki who escaped in 2012 is actually still out there in the main timeline we've been watching play out since 2008, and actually always was. Keeping up? No. Yeah, neither are we. But it's a cool theory anyway, right? We know Kurt Russell's ego had strategically planted his seeds throughout the universe in an attempt to take over it at various points in MCU history. And we know that in 2017's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, his plans were thwarted by the titular group. However, thanks to the events of Avengers Endgame, there could be one timeline in which Ego killed everyone. At least according to this theory. In the 2014 timeline the Avengers went back to, they would have prevented the Guardians of the Galaxy from ever forming or stopping Ego. Nebula was killed in the future, Gamora got trapped in that same future, and Peter Quill was knocked out on Morag. If he was still traveling the universe with Yondu and the Ravagers, the group undoubtedly would have met up with Ego before long, and he'd have turned Quill into a celestial battery as part of his plan.
Spending the next 1,000 years as a battery!
Without the intervention of Quill's powerful, capable family, aka the Guardians of the Galaxy, Ego's plan would have worked, and he'd be the one ruling the universe unopposed. Especially given that Thanos would be dead in that timeline, having been transported to 2023 and killed. What's cooler than being Groot? Well, how about a Groot with amazing Thor-like powers? We know, right?
Groot!
Just imagine a version of the lovable tree-like character that could summon lightning and control the Bifrost. Well, that's what one fan theory suggested could happen in Avengers Endgame. It didn't happen, of course, but it still could going forward.
I am Groot!
An extension of the teen version of Groot currently serves as the handle for Thor's god-killing weapon, and the theory suggests that eventually the piece of Groot serving as the handle will sprout into an all-new Groot with the most amazing set of powers. But is that a realistic possibility? To be honest, the odds seem fairly strongly stacked against it. But we should never say never. We're talking about a comic book movie universe here. All it would take is a magical trigger, or perhaps even just a drop of water. Regardless of whether it turns out to be true or not, we can't yet rule it out. And it would be absolutely awesome. As far as we're aware, the only character who knew every possible outcome of the conflict with Thanos was Doctor Strange, after he used the Time Stone to view them all in Avengers Infinity War. But there was a theory that Avengers Endgame would reveal Nick Fury also knew exactly how it would all play out. And that's why he contacted Captain Marvel on his pager in the Infinity War post-credits scene. The theory suggested that the Sorcerer Supreme sent his astral form back to the 1990s while he was on Titan viewing those 14 million futures and informed Fury how to prepare. While that theory wasn't confirmed in Endgame, it wasn't debunked either. Going forward, we might learn that Fury did receive a visit from Doctor Strange, and when you think about it, it kinda makes sense. Fury had started the Avenger Initiative in the 90s, but only started to execute it in 2008.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
It would also explain why Fury never acts surprised when crazy stuff goes down. Aliens from another world? Nope, that didn't surprise Fury. It's still entirely possible. There was a theory that Zoe Saldana's Gamora would be brought back to life in Avengers Endgame in spite of the fact that she wasn't a victim of the snap because the heroes would discover she was actually trapped in Soulworld and get her out of there. Obviously, that didn't end up happening, and the version of Gamora who died in Avengers Infinity War is still well and truly dead.
I'm sorry, little one.
But the theory could still come true going forward in the MCU, and the original Gamora could indeed still return. Of course, Avengers Endgame rectified the issue of no Gamora by letting the 2014 version of the character loose in 2023, but that still shouldn't rule out the idea of the original coming back. Should the Avengers explore the idea of bringing Natasha Romanoff back, which you have to imagine they'll at least attempt given how devastated they were at losing her, they might find that there is a way to bring the Soul Stone sacrifices back to life by extracting them from Soulworld in some way. If that's the case, they could inadvertently save Gamora as well. We all saw Thanos ruthlessly tear the Mind Stone out of Vision's forehead in Avengers Infinity War, but there was a theory that Shuri would bring him back to life in Avengers Endgame. She didn't end up doing that, as she only got a small amount of screen time in the movie's final act. But there is still a chance that she could bring the powerful android back in the MCU. In the midst of the Battle of Wakanda in Infinity War, we saw Shuri remapping the neural links between Vision and the Mind Stone. She was interrupted before she could finish the job, but she would surely have saved her work. So she'll still have a map of his neural network, which should allow someone of her genius to recreate his artificial intelligence. We already know for sure that Paul Bettany's character will be returning in the WandaVision television series, so this could well be the way in which his return happens. There were countless theories about how the Avengers would defeat Thanos prior to Avengers Endgame, and one of the more interesting ideas was that they'd obtain a 7th Infinity Stone to use against the Mad Titan. In the comic books, the 7th Infinity Stone is called the Ego Gem, which contains the essence of Nemesis, an omnipotent being who got fed up of her own existence and shattered herself across 2 universes. If the Avengers were to acquire the Ego Gem, they would possess more power than the other Infinity Stones combined. And while that obviously didn't happen in Endgame, we could still see the 7th Stone at some point in the future. The idea of Nemesis coming to the MCU is also an exciting one, as there are very few beings in the Marvel Universe who could up the ante as far as power is concerned after what we saw in Endgame. But Nemesis is definitely one of them.
There's a little pea coming out of me right now.
We know Thanos was defeated in Avengers Endgame. Twice, in fact. But it's the fact that he was defeated twice, which means the theory of him not being gone for good is more likely.
I know what it's like to lose.
Now that we know alternate timelines exist in the franchise, which is what enabled two different versions of Thanos to be killed, there's every chance the character could re-emerge in the future, perhaps from another of the many timelines that exist. Thanos is particularly likely to return at some point, given his long-standing connection to Mistress Death, the physical embodiment of the very concept of death in the Marvel Universe. If Death, who we know does exist in the MCU, as she was one of the cosmic entities who created the Infinity Stones, was impressed with the Mad Titan's actions in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, she could very well resurrect him to sit by her side as the franchise moves into Phase 4. Did you enjoy this video? Did you have any theories about Avengers Endgame that could yet turn out to be true? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Screen Rant for more great videos like this one. We'll see you next time!